The scalpel was already in her hand when the Admiral walked in unannounced. Lieutenant Commander Nora Voss did not flinch. She had been trained, by people whose names no government would ever acknowledge, not to flinch. She redirected her eyes to the unconscious seal on the operating table and pressed forward with the extraction of a fragment lodged 2 centimeters below the left clavicle. Routine. She had done it 100 times. She had done harder things in far worse rooms than this. Dr. Voss. Admiral Raymond Holt's voice filled the surgical suite the way a pressure system fills a weather map, with authority and the promise of damage. This is not a scheduled procedure. The patient presented with an embedded fragment causing vascular risk, Admiral. I made the call. She did not look up. You're welcome to observe from behind the glass. He did not go behind the glass. What happened next would later be reconstructed from the room's overhead camera footage, replayed 17 times by 3 separate intelligence committees. Admiral Holt stepped forward to examine the monitor displaying the patient's vitals. In doing so, his line of sight crossed the surgical field, and in that crossing, landed on Nora Voss's left forearm, exposed from elbow to wrist where her surgical gown had ridden up. The marks were not subtle to a trained eye. 6 parallel scars, evenly spaced, too deliberate to be accidental, too old to be recent. Below them, partially obscured by the gown's hem, a brand, not the crude kind, but precise, almost clinical. A small geometric symbol that intelligence officers trained in field identification protocols would recognize immediately. Holt recognized it. His face did not change. That was what the camera captured most clearly. A man absorbing catastrophic information without moving a single muscle. He stood there for 4 full seconds. Then he said, "Finish the procedure, doctor. My office. 30 minutes." He left. Nora continued working. Her hands did not shake, but behind the mask, her jaw tightened once, the only concession her body made to the alarm detonating inside her chest. She had been careful for 3 years. 3 years inside Bethesda Naval Medical Center, embedded in the tissue of the United States military's most elite medical infrastructure, treating the men who carried the country's most sensitive operational knowledge back in their bodies like shrapnel. 3 years of building trust, building access, building the architecture of a lie so convincing she had almost started to believe it herself. The brand on her arm was from a facility in Kyrgyzstan. She had been held there for 11 days. What happened during those 11 days had been locked inside a part of her mind that her handlers, the real ones, the ones who had placed her here, had chemically suppressed before insertion. She did not remember Kyrgyzstan. She did not remember how she got the brand. She did not remember the name she had used before she became Nora Voss. But the memories were coming back, in fragments, like shrapnel working itself to the surface. She closed the incision with 11 sutures, stripped her gloves, and walked to the Admiral's office. He was standing at the window when she arrived, looking out over the manicured grounds of the facility. Washington, D.C. shimmered at the edge of the horizon. He did not turn around. "Sit down," he said. "I prefer to stand." A pause. "The mark on your arm. Program Lazarus. You know what that means." She said nothing, because she did not entirely know what it meant, and admitting that was more dangerous than silence. Holt turned. He was older than his photographs suggested, with the kind of face that accumulates rather than ages, each year adding density, not lines. His eyes were the flat, assessing gray of a man who had made life and death decisions from air-conditioned rooms while other people bled. "I'm going to tell you something that will surprise you," he said. "I'm not going to have you arrested. That does surprise me. You're going to tell me everything you know about the network that put you here. And in exchange, I'm going to keep you alive long enough to be useful." He crossed his arms. "Or you can run, and you'll be dead before you reach New Orleans." The mention of New Orleans hit her like a fist. A flash, white walls, a man screaming, her own voice giving coordinates she did not recognize. Gone in an instant. "New Orleans," she repeated carefully. Something shifted in Holt's expression, barely perceptible, but she caught it. "You don't remember," he said. It was not a question. "I remember enough." That was a lie. But lies were the architecture she had been built on, and she was not ready to demolish them yet. Not here. Not in front of a man she did not yet know how to read. What she did know, someone had placed her inside Bethesda to harvest classified medical data from SEAL team members, diagnoses, psych evaluations, medication records, physiological weak points, information that could be used to predict, manipulate, or eliminate the most dangerous operators in the United States military. She had been transmitting that data for 3 years, encrypted in the metadata of routine lab reports, to a handler she had never met face to face. What she did not know, whether she had chosen this, whether she had been coerced, whether the people she worked for were the villains or whether the Admiral standing in front of her was. The memories would tell her, if they kept coming. "I'll need immunity," she said. "You'll need a miracle," he replied. "I'm offering the next best thing, a head start." Outside the window, the first snow of December was beginning to fall on Washington. Somewhere in the building below them, the SEAL she had just sutured was waking up in recovery, completely unaware that the woman who had saved his life was the same woman who had been quietly dismantling his country's defenses, one medical file at a time. Nora Voss made the only calculation available to her. Stay, cooperate, survive long enough to find out who she really was. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tonight," said Admiral Holt. "Pack nothing that has your name on it." New Orleans hit her like a recovered memory. They arrived at 200, the city still breathing its particular hot rot perfume even in December, the French Quarter burning amber and red behind the mist rolling off the Mississippi. Holt had arranged a black SUV, no plates, and a safe house in Tremé, a narrow shotgun house behind a wrought iron gate where the neighbors were either too drunk or too wise to ask questions. Inside, Nora sat on a stripped mattress and let the city work on her. It came in pieces. A restaurant? No, a building behind a restaurant, stairs, a room with a low ceiling and a single bulb. A man in a linen suit who spoke with a mid-Atlantic accent she couldn't place. She had handed him something. A drive. No. A folder. No. "You're doing it again," said Holt from across the room. He was dismantling and reassembling his sidearm on the kitchen table with the practiced indifference of a man who needed his hands busy when his mind was working. "Doing what?" "Staring at the wall like you're watching a film no one else can see." She focused on him. "I've been here before. This city. I know." He set down the barrel. 3 years ago, before your insertion into Bethesda, your handler met you here. We have partial surveillance, a building on Chartres Street. You were photographed entering but never leaving, which means there's a secondary exit, which means the building is still active infrastructure. You've been watching me for 3 years. We've been aware of you for 3 years. Watching implies resources we didn't have until 6 months ago. A pause. You transmitted something significant in March. SEAL Team 6 psych evaluations, full battery, including stress response profiles and pharmacological sensitivities. That data disappeared into a network we've been trying to map for 2 years. It surfaced in Chicago 4 months later, in the hands of a procurement broker who sells to 3 separate foreign intelligence services. The room on Chartres Street sharpened in her memory. White walls, the man in linen. His voice, "You will never remember this meeting. That is by design. What you carry without knowing you carry it." She had been a courier who didn't know she was carrying anything. "They suppressed my memory," she said. "Not just the torture, the transfers. I was transmitting data I didn't know I had." Holt looked at her for a long moment. "Yes. For how long?" "We don't know. Possibly from the beginning." The implication landed in the room like ordnance. She had not been a willing spy. She had been a weapon someone else was firing. A woman walking through secure corridors, downloading classified files into a memory she wasn't allowed to access, transmitting them through channels she couldn't see. Every file she had touched, every SEAL she had treated, every evaluation she had reviewed, she had done it all, and she had done none of it. The building on Chartres Street was abandoned on the surface, a shuttered antique import business with boards across the lower windows and a lease registered to a shell company in Delaware. Holt's 2-man team breached the rear, while Nora and the Admiral entered through the front with a bump key and the confidence of people who belonged everywhere. The secondary exit was a tunnel. It ran 40 meters north and opened into the basement of a functioning laundromat, which was closed at 3 a.m. but operating its machines on a timer. Clean, clever, the kind of operational detail that only survives if someone is still maintaining it. Someone was still using this route. In the tunnel, Nora found a dead drop, a magnetic case behind a junction box. Inside, a USB drive and a laminated card with a single word: Chicago. Holt read it over her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They were on a flight by 05:30. Chicago in December was a different kind of cold than Washington. Meaner, structural, the wind off Lake Michigan carrying the conviction of a continent behind it. The address on the USB's metadata led them to the Fulton Market District, to a climate-controlled data storage facility that catered to financial and legal firms and asked no questions about contents. Unit 7 Echo had been rented for 4 years under the name of a doctor. Elena Marsh, one of Nora's previous identities, she realized with a jolt, staring at the rental agreement Holt spread on the hood of their rental car. She had rented this unit. She had no memory of it. Inside were 11 encrypted hard drives, a laptop with a satellite uplink, and a photograph. The photograph showed a man in navy dress whites at a formal reception. His face was circled in red marker. Beneath it, in handwriting she recognized, because it was hers, 3 words: "He knows everything." The man in the photograph was Admiral Raymond Holt. She had written it. She had circled his face. Months, maybe years, before he found her in that operating room, which meant that somewhere in the version of herself she could not remember, she had already suspected him, had already marked him. She looked up from the photograph. Holt was watching her. "You already knew this was here," she said. "I knew something was here, not what. The photograph is of you. I see that." The wind ripped between the buildings. She calculated the distance to the facility's exit, his position relative to hers, whether the sidearm under her coat would clear its holster faster than his, and then she stopped calculating, because if he had wanted her dead, she would already be dead, and because the part of her that remembered Kyrgyzstan, however fragmentarily, was beginning to understand that the people who had put her in that room were the ones who deserved her violence. Not this man, not yet. "If I'm wrong about you," she said, "I will kill you." "If you're wrong about me," he said, "I'll let you." She believed him. She didn't know why. Maybe that was the most dangerous thing about Admiral Raymond Holt. He was the kind of man you believed even when every rational system told you not to. She pocketed the photograph. "Seattle," she said. "The uplink on that laptop, it pings a server cluster in Seattle. That's where the data goes. That's where the network lives." Holt took out his phone and made a single call. No name, no greeting. "Move the asset to the Pacific Northwest," he said. "Tonight." They had 24 hours before whoever maintained that dead drop in New Orleans realized it had been emptied. 24 hours before the network knew it had been found. In the cold Chicago night, the last of Nora Voss's suppressed memories began their final surfacing. And what rose was not fear. It was fury. Seattle received them under a sky the color of old pewter, the kind of persistent northwest overcast that flattens distances and muffles sound and makes the city feel like a held breath. The server cluster traced back to a private cybersecurity firm in Sodo, south of downtown, a neighborhood of warehouses repurposed into tech campuses called Meridian Shield LLC. On paper, it provided threat analysis and data protection services to 12 mid-tier defense contractors. In practice, it was the central nervous system of the most sophisticated military intelligence resale operation running on American soil. 11 drives worth of stolen SEAL physiological and psychological data sold piecemeal to the highest bidders in 3 time zones. They had 41 minutes after landing before Holt's phone picked up a network ping indicating that the Chicago unit had been accessed remotely, someone checking the camera, finding the drives gone. The hunt was now mutual. Meridian Shields building had 8 points of entry, a private security team of 4, and a server room on the 3rd floor with its own independent power and a satellite uplink that could erase everything in 90 seconds if a kill switch was activated. Nora knew this because she remembered designing it. The memory came back fully and without mercy as they sat in the rental car across the street. Herself, younger, thinner, sharper, the woman she had been before the name Nora Voss, sitting in this same building, 3 floors up, laying out the architecture of a network that would take the United States military 3 years to even partially locate. She had not been coerced, not at first. She had believed in it. In the beginning, before Kyrgyzstan, before whatever they had done to her there, she had believed that the American military's control over its operators, its ability to predict, shape, suppress, and discard human beings in the name of national security, was a machinery that deserved to be destabilized. She had built the network with conviction. Then they had sent her to Kyrgyzstan to be remade into a tool, and conviction had been replaced by obedience, and then obedience had been suppressed into unconscious compliance, and then she had woken up inside a hospital with a name she didn't recognize and hands that knew how to heal. The woman who had built this network no longer existed. The woman who was going to dismantle it did. The kill switch is biometric, she told Holt. Fingerprint of one person. Yours? The man in linen. I never learned his real name, but I know his hands. Is he in there? If he knows we're coming, yes. He'll want to wipe it personally. Holt checked his weapon. Then we need to move before he gets the chance. What followed was 11 minutes of controlled violence in a building that had never expected to be found. Holt's two-man team hit the rear. She and the Admiral took the stairs, 3 flights, 2 guards, one of whom she dropped with the kind of clinical efficiency that comes not from training, but from the body's older memory of survival. The second guard was Holt's, 3rd floor, server room. The door was reinforced. She had specified the gauge herself, and it was locked from the inside. Through it, the sound of keystrokes, someone working fast. He's activating the wipe, she said. Holt stepped back and put 3 rounds through the lock plate, not to breach it, but to destroy the electronic mechanism. The door swung open. The man in the linen suit was older than she remembered, grayer, but the hands were the same, precise, surgical, the kind of hands that belonged to someone who had never once in his life gotten them dirty in the way that counted. He had 2 fingers on the biometric pad. "Don't," said Nora. He looked at her with the flat recognition of a man seeing a project gone wrong. "You remember," he said. "Enough. Then you know what this is. You know what we were trying to... I know what you did to me in Kyrgyzstan." Silence. The server fans hummed. Outside the rain-streaked windows, Seattle glittered indifferently below. "Step away from the pad," said Holt. The man in linen looked at the Admiral with the contempt of someone who had spent years treating military authority as an adversary to be outmaneuvered. Then he looked back at Nora, and in his eyes she saw the calculation. The same calculation she had been running since the operating room in Bethesda, and she knew what he was going to do before he did it. He pressed the pad. She crossed the room in 2 steps and hit the emergency power cutoff on the server rack's physical breaker. A failsafe she had also designed because she had always designed 2 ways out of every room. A quarter of a second before the biometric wipe could execute, the room went dark. When the backup lighting kicked in, the man in linen was on the floor with Holt's knee in his back and his hands zip-tied. The drives were intact. Every name, every transaction, every foreign intelligence service that had purchased data on American operators. 11 drives of evidence that would, over the following months, result in the prosecution of 17 individuals across 4 countries and the dismantling of a network that had operated invisibly inside the American defense infrastructure for 6 years. Nora Voss stood in the server room and looked at what she had built and what she had destroyed and felt neither pride nor guilt, only the strange, rinsed clarity of a woman who had finally found the edge of her own story. Holt appeared beside her. "Federal team will be here in 12 minutes. You should be here when they arrive. The immunity agreement was conditional on my cooperation," she said. "I've cooperated." He understood immediately. "Nora, that's not my name." A pause. "I don't know what my name is yet, but I'm going to find out. I can help with that." She looked at him. This complicated, authoritative, unexpectedly trustworthy man who had stood beside her across 3 cities and never once fired in the wrong direction. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you and not just leaving." She handed him the photograph, the one with his face circled in her own handwriting, and watched him fold it without looking at it. "If I find you," he said, "it'll be because I'm worried. If you find me," she said, "it'll be because I let you." She walked out of the server room, down 3 flights of stairs, and out through the rear of the building into the Seattle rain. She had no bag, no phone, no identity. She had 6 parallel scars on her left forearm and a brand that belonged to a room in Kyrgyzstan and a mind that was finally, painfully, mercifully beginning to clear. Somewhere between the building and the waterfront, she stopped under a transit shelter and sat with her eyes closed and let the last fragment surface. Not a memory of violence, but of before. A kitchen, coffee, a name her mother had called her, small and private and entirely her own. She held it the way you hold something fragile after a long fall. Then she stood up, walked to the water, and disappeared into the city, which is to say, into herself. Behind her, in a server room in Sodo, 11 hard drives waited for people with authority and conscience to do something with the truth. She had delivered it. What happened next was someone else's war.